Plastic evaluation is our core expertise at Gradical. We help medical technology companies choose the right plastic for their application with the technical suitability, regulatory compliance, and improved sustainability. Learn more under www.gradical.ch/plastic-evaluation. Our guest today is Dr. Chris DeArmitt. Chris is a world-class plastic consultant and independent environmental expert. Chris had a stellar career in the plastic industry at firms such as BASF before starting his own consultancy, Phantom Plastics. In 2020, he wrote The Plastic Paradox, where he tackles persistent myths about the environmental impact of plastics. He founded a nonprofit called the Plastics Research Council to further his mission of spreading the scientific truth about plastics. In his recently released second book, Shattering the Plastic Illusion, he clears up many more myths about plastics. The book is free and the link is in the description. Here's our discussion. Hi, Chris, and welcome to the podcast. You're a plastic and environmental expert. What made you passionate about this topic, and what made you write 2 books about this?
Well, that's an interesting question, Lucas. Thanks for having me on the show. This all started when my daughters came home from school, and they were like 8 years old, and they'd been taught clear lies by their teachers. They were told that plastics don't degrade. And there are literally thousands of studies on plastic degradation. That's one of my specialist areas. So I'm actually not passionate about plastic and the environment at all. But what I am passionate about is truth and not telling lies to our kids at school. Because if you teach the kids nonsense and you teach the public nonsense, you end up with solutions that don't work. You end up making things worse instead of better. So that's where my driving force is from, not from plastics or the environment, but just sharing truth, which is what also proper scientists should be interested in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your career and what you actually do, what your work is, what your consulting work is about, and why you're an expert in this area, basically.
Yeah, I've spent my whole life in plastic materials. So my PhD, my degree, are in that. My professor was Norman Billingham, who's a very famous plastic expert. So my wife likes to describe me as a chef for plastics. I'm the formulator who tells people what additives should go in there. And people think of me as being, oh, isn't he from the plastics industry? But I don't make plastics, and I don't sell plastics, and I don't market plastics. I'm just the guy who tells people how to make the materials work. And I understand what all the additives are doing in there, how to solve problems and stuff like that. So big companies come to me and ask me for advice on that. Mm-hmm. And so I am totally independent. Nobody really tells me what to do. And that's where my income is from being a scientist who solves plastic problems. And sometimes, ironically, I get people saying, well, we can't trust a plastic expert to tell us about plastics. And I always think, well, who are you going to ask? Your hairdresser or your car mechanic? I mean, people are so desperate to hate plastics that when a scientist who's spent their whole life in plastics shows them 100 studies, they say, oh, no, we can't trust any of that because this guy is a plastics expert. And you're like, I would love to see these people. Like, let's say they have a heart attack and they go to the hospital. I say, oh, we'll get the doctor. We'll get the cardiologist. And they say, no. I don't want to speak to the cardiologist. I want you to go get the janitor. I want you to go get the cleaner and have them look at me. I could never trust a medical expert to help me with my heart attack. I mean, so this is how desperate people are to avoid looking at the truth, is that they say that they can't listen to plastic from plastic scientists. It's kind of crazy.
Okay, so name some of the plastic myths you're fighting against.
I would say there was a few big ones. One is that we're drowning in plastic, and it's not really true. If you look at the numbers, plastic is 0.5%, less than 1% of all the materials we use, and that's by weight or by volume. Mm-hmm. So anyone who says that we're drowning in plastic is not really interested in material use, right? They're interested in being against plastic, because if they're really interested in materials use, we are using too much material. But if that was really their concern, they wouldn't be talking about less than 0.5% of all the materials. They would be mentioning also the other 99%. So that's one of the big misconceptions. We're not drowning in plastic. It's under 1%.
Okay. So, and what's the most used material then?
The most used? Yeah. By far, it's cement and concrete and steel and wood. Those are the big ones. And paper is also as big as plastic. So those are the materials that are used the most, generate the most waste, and create the most impact. Mm-hmm. So I'm a problem solver, right? We can't solve problems by obsessing over 0.5% of something. It just doesn't make any sense. I got another medical analogy for you there. Imagine you go to the hospital with a heart attack and they say, well, we'll brush your teeth and comb your hair and we'll send you home. That's basically what we're doing when we say, let's focus on plastic and ignore the 99% of other waste and material. And it's basically the same if you look at any of the topics to do with plastic. If you look at ocean plastic, the amounts are thousands of times less than we were told. It's not, the oceans are not choking in plastic. And the problem there is not bottles or bags. In fact, you have to sail 100,000 miles in a ship to find one piece of plastic bag. So anyone who shows you a picture of a turtle with a plastic bag around their neck is out of their mind. That's never happened in the history of the world. So that's another misconception, that we're drowning in plastic, it's choking the oceans. These things are just not true. Plastic is basically less than 1% of anything that you measure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I often get requests for more sustainable alternatives to, let's say, fossil-based plastics. And I want to pick your brain on what you think or what you know about the alternatives. Let's start with recycled plastics. What are the recycling methods and their environmental impact, and which are good for the environment and which ones are not?
Yeah. The first thing I'd like to say about recycling is there's too much emphasis on it. And here's why. Our number one goal should be to reduce impact. And so you should pick the material that creates the least impact. That's the most important thing, is reducing greenhouse gas for most people, reducing fossil fuel, reducing waste. And then once you've picked the most sensible, the wisest, the lowest impact material, then you should recycle that material. So some people have it the wrong way around. They're so obsessed with the recycling rate that they forget to pick the greenest material in the first place. So the answer is, in 90% of cases, you should pick plastic, because according to life cycle studies, in 90% of applications, it has the least impact. And then when you've done that, then you should recycle it. And the way to do that is mechanical recycling. Mechanical recycling is like you put it through a coffee grinder and then you melt it again and injection mold it and make a new part. And that works for most plastic. It's the greenest, it's the cheapest, it's the simplest way, because it's using machines we already have. Everyone knows how to do mechanical recycling. And if you do that, you're taking something that has the least impact and you're further reducing the impact by 70 or 80% usually when you mechanically recycle. So you're taking the best solution, making it even better. And I like to think of it like this. Recycling is not the goal, but it's like the icing on the cake. The cake is picking the greenest solution. And then if you recycle it, you make it even better. But even if there was zero recycling, plastic still has the least impact. So the idea, people think we need to recycle to make plastic green, but we really don't. It's the icing on the cake. Even if we don't do any recycling, we just throw it in a landfill, it still has the least impact. As you know from your question, there are other options. There's chemical recycling, there's advanced recycling, there's pyrolysis. There are other options. But so far, none of them have really shown to be better than mechanical recycling. What they're good for is, let's say you took a PET bottle, you recycled it mechanically 10 times, and now the properties are bad, so you can't do that anymore. Then you would either make a fleece from it, like a Patagonia fleece with that PET, or you could chemically recycle it. So only after using it several times would you need to then consider chemically recycling it or disposing of it in some other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, I work mostly in medical applications, and with mechanical recycling, there are some concerns about quality, change management, and basically risk management for a patient. Like in low risk devices, you can use mechanical recycling. So I always do the example of the crutches. You could do crutches from mechanical recycled material, because the worst that can happen is the crutches break and the patient breaks his leg again. So in this case, we can make sure that mechanical recycling fulfills the requirements in terms of mechanical properties, and it's safe. And like on the other hand of the spectrum, you have like implants, and you will never do implants from a recycled material, because it's just too risky. There are like a few, like a dozen or so material manufacturers or plastic manufacturers that support use of their plastic in implantable applications. And therefore, if Virgin doesn't really risk implantables, we probably can exclude like mechanical recycling. Right. And then there's some other disadvantages of mechanical recycling, like color, because it's usually like dark or gray. So why don't you elaborate a little on like solvent-based recycling or chemical recycling? like in terms of quality and environmental impact compared to like virgin and not to mechanical recycling? Because we can agree this is the best option. If you can do it, you do mechanical recycling. But if you don't have the option, what could I do?
Yeah. So it's kind of a trade-off. A lot of recycling is changing a material problem or a waste problem into an energy problem. So if you have unlimited free green energy, you can do any kind of recycling you want and it makes sense. But unless you have that, a lot of these methods are technically possible. You can pyrolyze plastic into smaller molecules, but there's never been a life cycle study that shows that that's actually green. So a lot of companies are charging the governments millions and millions for pyrolysis. And as far as I know, the best experts say no life cycle study has shown that pyrolysis is actually good for the environment. So you can do it technically. It's very interesting. And if the government wants to give you $1 million to mess around in your lab and do it, great. So, and the same with chemical recycling in general. PET chemical recycling might work at some point because that's a polyester. So you can chop it to pieces very easily into the original starting materials using an enzyme or using sodium hydroxide, standard chemicals. And that works. But so far, that's not as green as just using new plastic. So some of these things will only really make sense when we have a better source of cheap green energy. So, and there's another one from Procter & Gamble where they take a material and they do some super purification where the polymer that comes out can be even purer than the starting material, than the virgin plastic was. And that would be suitable for implants. But again, that takes a lot of energy and a lot of processes. So I'm not convinced. And even the people really working on that, the scientists, are not really convinced themselves that will ever really take off in a big way. So this is how it works, right? The green groups criticize the plastics industry. Then the plastics industry spend hundreds of millions trying to be greener and putting in together projects and new plants and pilot plants. And then when they don't work out to be economical or whatever, and they shut them, then the green groups say, oh, look at you, you were just fooling us all along. But the trouble is that the plastics companies only did all that stuff in the first place because the green groups were lying about plastics and saying plastics are bad, and they sort of were forced to do something, right? And then, of course, they get criticized when they do it. So it's very hard for the plastics industry to do something that's right when the people who are against plastic are not really genuine in their beliefs. They're just spreading misinformation because that's how they get their donations. So a lot of the focus on recycling and these other forms of recycling is not really genuine. It doesn't really help anyone.
Okay. So what do you think about the claims that namely Lionel Bazell has done? I think like a year and a half ago, they came out with a catalyst-based system where they reduced the temperature of the pyrolysis by I don't know what, but the claim is that the CO2 footprint is like half of virgin for polypropylene, polyethylene feedstock that is coming from chemical recycling.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. And LyondellBasell is certainly a credible company. So, but I haven't looked at that study. So the trouble is, a politician or a normal person will give you an opinion, but I'm a scientist, right? So as I haven't read the study and I haven't seen the numbers and I haven't had an expert check it, I would say that sounds very promising and should definitely be investigated further. But I could, on a personal level, give you a real sound opinion about it.
Yeah. But I mean, as a plastic expert, this is the direction where you should be investigating. Yeah, making more efficient processes that use less energy for the same quality output, and that is basically where we can take a material that already has a good footprint and then further reduce it by not compromising the quality and having a better impact.
One problem with this recycling thing is that I've got a graph that compares the impact of materials and their cost. Mm-hmm. If you look at really expensive things like gold, they're terrible for the environment. So you make 20,000 kilograms of CO2 for every kilogram of gold that you make. And gold is also very expensive. So things that are terrible for the environment are very expensive because of all the energy and pollution created to make them. And on the other end of the scale, we have things like polyethylene and paper, which have very low impact, but they're not really worth recycling because they're so cheap. Right. So it's hard to make money recycling them. So this is a problem. People are focusing so much on recycling the materials that have the least impact and the least cost. And it doesn't always make economic sense. These companies trying to recycle are going out of business all the time. It's much easier to make money recycling gold. Yeah, so that's a problem that getting the energy down with pyrolysis, like you mentioned with the LyondellBasell, that's great. That saves energy. But still, you have to look at the total system and see if it really makes sense. This idea of focusing on the materials which are already the greenest and already the cheapest, and less than 1% of materials is just a giant distraction from actually doing anything that helps. We need to spend more time focusing on the other materials which are creating more impact and cost more and are more worth recycling.
I mean, you have a very, very instructive example. It's like a coffee machine manufacturer here in Switzerland. They presented this at the Swissmatic Day. And what they did is, and I love this, it's an interactive LCA that they did for their coffee machines. And if you imagine, they produce for companies like Starbucks or Costa, and they also do like home machines. So it's like two different segments. And it's basically a calculator that calculates your environmental impact or CO2 footprint for your coffee. So for one functional unit is a coffee, basically. And if I do 7 coffees a week, like at home, I drink 1 coffee a day or maybe 2 a day. And then I have reasonable amounts for coffee and milk. So I drink my coffee black. Then the most impact that you get from your coffee is like half of it, or 60% is your machine. And then on the other side, if you do like 500 coffees a day with a reasonable amount of coffee, and then, as you know it, in Starbucks they use a lot of milk. The most environmental impact that the coffees have is like first the milk, then the coffee, and then use time electricity. So if a company comes to me and says, like, I do coffee machines, I want to use recycled materials to reduce the footprint, and like, if you look at the system, what you should be doing is like where you can have an impact is make your machine more efficient in order for it to use less energy, even if you make the machine heavier or use higher quality materials that have higher impact.
Yes.
And the other thing you could do is like convince people to drink their coffee black.
Yeah. That is a common theme in this whole area. People are focusing on the wrong stuff. Mm-hmm. So, for example, they looked at what can you really do to reduce impact? And the answer is fly less, drive less, and eat less meat. Mm-hmm. Those are the 3 things that you could really do right now. And you know what the problem with those things is? Nobody wants to do them. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to feel like a good person. They want to look like a good person, a virtuous person to their friends, but they don't want to actually make any of the sacrifices that would be required to really be a good person. So instead, they pretend to be a good person by swinging a cotton bag over their head and say, hey, look at me, I'm a wonderful person. When a cotton bag creates 200 times more impact than a plastic bag. So this is a problem. People are focusing on bags, which make 0 difference to the environment. I mean, the plastic bag, there's 30 studies in the world on life cycle studies on bags. Every single time the plastic bag comes out having least impact, lower than paper, lower than cotton, and lower than reusable bags because people forget them at home and don't reuse them. So people are focused on stuff that's proven to make no difference whatsoever, all because they want to feel good about themselves without actually doing anything that helps the environment. And that's the irony of this. It's all a big distraction. It's all like a big smoke and mirrors game from a magician where they're trying to distract you with stuff that makes no difference.
Yeah.
And part of it's funded by the steel industry. So there's a couple of iron and steel billionaires in Australia, and they actually created a non-profit called Minderoo. And Minderoo writes reports that points the finger at the plastics industry, who do much, much less impact than the iron and steel industry. So think about it. If you're an iron and steel billionaire and you made all of your billions by harming the environment, what cleverer move than to make a non-profit that writes reports saying it's somebody else's fault? So there's a lot of funny business going on here when you, and that's actually covered in my new book coming up. Shattering the Plastics Paradox. I explain not just what the science says, but also who's been misleading us and why.
Okay. And one thing you didn't mention is not only the environmental impact, but also the performance. It's like I have small kids, and I banned Capri Sun because Capri Sun is like the children's drink. Like they have the paper, the coated paper straws, and they last like half a package, and then they're chewed up. And it's like I banned them because the performance is just so poor.
Yeah,
I'd rather have them with a plastic straw. Yeah, and also the plastic bags. Like the paper bags rip like far more often than the plastic bag do. Like moving on to the next alternative material to virgin plastic would be bio-based plastics.
Yeah.
So I'm talking here about like the bio-based feedstock, but conventional plastics such as polyethylene or bio-PET or whatever. What do you think about those?
The first thing to say is that they exist. Regular people don't realize that for years now, you could buy bio-based polyethylene from Braskem. You can buy bio-based polypropylene from Borealis. These are commercial products, right? You can go and buy them right now. You've been able to buy them for years, and they behave exactly the same as the regular, safe, friendly plastics, cheap plastics that we have. The trouble is right now is that these materials, if you make them from plant oil instead of fossil fuel, they're more expensive. And as so far, I haven't really seen them coming out as greener. So they're more sustainable because they're made from renewable feedstocks, but I haven't seen them actually having lower impact so far. Maybe there are some cases of that, but so far I haven't really seen a convincing case that they're reducing impact compared to using fossil fuel. And here's the thing. People want to get away from fossil fuel, but 85% of that is burned. We burn it in the cars, we burn it for heating oil, we burn it for airplanes. We're burning fossil fuel, almost all of it's just burned and nobody cares. And then we use 4% of it to make plastic, and people are like, whoa, that's too much, we've got to stop. So this is a silly argument. All the real scientists say we've got to stop burning fossil fuel to save all of it from making medicine and chemicals and plastics. That's what it's good for. And so that's really what we need to do, is to stop wasting it and burning it. Because if you make something like polyethylene, polypropylene, a park bench, you could use it for 20 years and still burn it at the end and get all the energy out, just the same energy you had in oil to start with. So you're actually getting a useful life out of that oil instead of just burning it right away.
Yeah.
So I think that these bio-based alternatives, polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, nylons, they have great advantages in terms of they're a drop-in solution, they're cheap, they're safe, because changing materials is disastrous for the environment. If you have to throw away all your injection molds, for example, Lego did a study recently where they tried to replace the Lego material, ABS, with recycled PET. And on a technical level, that is possible. But if you look at the overall environmental footprint of getting rid of all of your machines and redesigning all of your factories for a new material, it ends up being worse for the environment. And that's why they stopped and said no. So these things have promise, but they only really make sense when the fossil fuel's gone. And that's way down the road.
There's also a difference between like bio-based, if you use like sugar, foods, basically, starches such as corn or potatoes or something like that, or something called like the biocircular feedstocks, such as used cooking oil and stuff like that. And that vastly increases the environmental footprint from an LCA perspective, because you don't get the land and water and fertilizer use accounted to your credit, but it goes to the food basically. And there I see some potential in it being the better material. Some words on that, and then we're going to switch to like the biodegradables, what people think of as bioplastics.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. If you can attribute it to something else because it was originally used for food, and then take that oil. But I know they also do that for diesel, right? They just burn it in trucks. I think doesn't McDonald's take all of their used frying pan oil and just filter it and use it to power trucks? So that may actually be greener because you've got less transportation involved. The fuel's already where you need it. You don't have to ship it somewhere else. So you'd have to look at the whole picture to see if taking that, collecting it, shipping it somewhere to make plastics actually makes sense or not.
Yeah, I mean that depends on what stage you are in replacing fossil fuels. Because you said we should start burning fossil fuels, and if we're doing that, we're also replacing all our cars or all our basically all our transportation towards something that is probably electric. And then you wouldn't have the diesel cars to burn it, and then there's a source if we don't have oil basically. But right. An implication of what would happen if we're stopping burning fossil fuels, you would pump out less oil from the earth, and that would increase the price of plastic probably.
Maybe. I don't know about that because it's supply and demand. So let's say 85% of the demand for oil went away, then they're going to have to drop prices to get rid of the oil that they've got. So I don't know about that. Somebody cleverer than me would have to work that out. It's not my area of expertise.
Somebody more clever than you, that's probably difficult to find. Let's talk about the biodegradable plastics.
Yeah.
Credical is the plastic expert in medical technology and supports you in the areas of sustainable plastics and material compliance. Our course, Sustainable Plastics and Medical Technology, will bring your development team up to date with the latest developments in sustainable plastics. In addition, we offer the course Regulatory Aspects of Plastic Selection at the CATS and the SCATZ, which provides guidance through the maze of regulations when selecting materials. More under www.credical.ch.
Well, people think that they want biodegradables, and here's why. They want to be able to drop their stuff on the floor and have it disappear, right? And that's just people being lazy. And plus, that's what we used to do, right? We used to wrap things in banana leaves and throw them on the floor. My mother has a charity in the Gambia, and so she says when that's what they're used to doing, right? They take their food, they throw it on the floor because it was in a banana leaf, and it disappears with the ants and the squirrels and the mice or whatever. But nowadays, they do the same with plastic because that's what they're used to. So this big drive for biodegradables is totally misguided. People want biodegradables so that they can be lazy, drop their stuff on the floor. And studies have shown that's exactly what they do when they get biodegradables. When people believe that the thing in their hand, the wrapper, is going to degrade, they drop it on the floor twice as much as if it's not going to degrade. So this is a problem. That's one problem with degradables. The second problem is they cost more. And the third problem is, what is degradation? That means converting a solid into carbon dioxide, which is the exact opposite of what all the global warming people want, right? They don't want to convert solids to carbon dioxide. That's why we have landfills. We put things in a landfill with low oxygen so that they don't degrade and form carbon dioxide. So the whole idea that we should pay more money for something that increases litter and when it degrades forms carbon dioxide is total insanity. It doesn't make sense on any level unless you're selling biodegradables, in which case it makes all the sense in the world because that's where your paycheck comes from. So people assume I'm a plastics guy and I'm going to support all this plastic stuff, whatever the plastics industries are doing. But some of this stuff, I just call them out every day and say, sorry, what you're doing makes no sense. The science doesn't agree with you, and this is just marketing nonsense. And the biodegradable stuff is one example.
Yeah.
And having said that, there are examples where it does work. Let's say you have a suture in your body, right, where you've got some stitches and you want it to degrade so that you don't have to take the stitches out. There are cases for biodegradable, but they're not candy wrappers and items like that.
And I mean, I work in the medical technology, and like all advantages of biodegradable plastics come from the bioresorbability properties, so that you can leave it in the body and it goes away in the body without harming the patient too much. And like if you use biodegradable plastics in medical, you get a whole bunch of problems and you don't get any benefits. So the potential benefit or the claimed benefit is it goes away in the environment. Like all medical waste is burned, basically. Yeah. So there are some pilot projects to try to recycle medical waste, but like on a big scale, it's burned because it's potentially contaminated. So biodegradability is out of the picture. And then secondly,
and the other problem, sorry to interrupt you, but the other thing is people want degradables because they think that regular plastics don't degrade. And as I told you, that's how I got started on this. Regular plastics do degrade. If you take a polyethylene bag and put it on your garden, it will be gone in 9 months. Mm-hmm. There are peer-reviewed studies showing that it degrades as fast as a leaf or a piece of paper, right? So people are asking for degradables because they think regular plastics don't degrade, but they're wrong. They do degrade. There are hundreds and hundreds of studies on it. So that everything about it makes no sense.
Yeah. And the second problem is like that biodegradable plastics, they degrade faster, and that is a problem for shelf life. So if you want a good shelf life of your medical product and you use something like a PLA or PBS or whatever, it's like you're gonna have issues with that. And that is really not a good solution. So I'm not a fan of it either. So you told us that plastics degrade, and sometimes you hear stuff like it takes like 100 years or 1,000 years for plastics to degrade. So what is a realistic timeline for something like polypropylene, polyethylene to degrade in the environment under certain conditions?
Yeah. So I have data on that in my new book, and I'm not trying to plug my new book here. It's called Shattering the Plastics Illusion, and it's free, just like my first book. So I'm giving the science away for free because I believe in truth. And so there are studies on that in that book. And so if you take a piece of polypropylene, which is one like Tupperware, that's one of the most common plastics, and you take a film of it, so a thin piece like a leaf or a piece of paper, and you put it in your desk drawer in the dark, it will lose its mechanical properties, lose its strength in less than a year. Sitting there in the dark at room temperature. It's like degrading like an apple would degrade, right? It's degrading way faster than paper under those conditions. I mean, there's pieces of paper over 1,000 years old that are still fine and you can still read what's written on them, right? Because paper is full of stabilizers. So if you took a piece of polypropylene that had no additives in it, it degrades really, really quickly, even in the dark at room temperature. That's how unstable these things are because they're carbon, right? They're held together with carbon, just like we are and apples are and leaves are, cellulose is. All of these things are made with similar chemistry. So what the public doesn't understand is that plastic is only as stable as the stabilizers you add to it. The global market for stabilizers of plastics is $5 billion a year. Right? Nobody would spend $5 billion on stabilizers if plastics were stable. That would be just stupid. You'd be throwing your money away, right? So you put in just enough stabilizer to make that plastic last as long as you want. So if you have a single-use plastic bag and you're expecting it to hang around for a year or two, you put in the very smallest amount of the cheapest stabilizer you can find to make it last a reasonable amount of time. And so if you were to leave it outside in the environment, which it's not designed to do, that stabilizer is very quickly burned in the sun and with the heat. And that thing will not just degrade and fall to pieces, but it will also biodegrade. People don't realize that polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, all of these things are actually biodegrading as well. There is tons of studies on it. And the green groups tell you that it's not true, but you can literally go to Google right now and type in biodegradation polyethylene, and you'll find hundreds of studies, right? So, and that's in the book too. So regular plastics degrade at a similar speed to a piece of wood or a piece of paper of the same size and shape. It does depend on whether there's water there or sunlight or whatever. But in general, it's degrading at the same speed as everything else you would imagine. And on the other hand, the great thing about plastic, let's say you want to make a water pipe to deliver clean, safe water. And so the life cycle studies show that plastic is the lowest impact way of doing that, much lower than copper or ductile iron, for example. There's like loads of studies and they all agree because plastic is just less energy to produce. So, and if you look at that, you want that pipe to last a long time because otherwise you have to dig it up, which is terrible for the environment to be spending all that energy to dig up the pipe and put in a new one. So you want something that lasts. And those pipes do last 100 years or more because they put in much better stabilizers in them. So that's the great thing about plastic. If you want it to fall to pieces, take the stabilizer out or use a small amount of a low performance stabilizer. If you want it to degrade really slowly, like last 100 years, then we can do that too. And that helps the environment because things which degrade quickly are usually bad for the environment because you have to make a new one.
Okay. So, and then the argument that I often hear is like, but then what about microplastics? So that's probably your favorite topic right now.
Yeah. The funny thing with microplastics is that a lot of it's a marketing exercise. If I did a Google search for micro metal, micro wood, micro glass, right? Nothing happens, right? It's just dust. If we have a particle of anything else, we call it dust. And if you look at what's in dust, a tiny, tiny fraction of it is plastic and it's non-toxic, but we call it microplastic to make it sound scary. The public thinks that this is some new thing and we don't have the testing data, but nothing could be further from the truth. I've read 500 studies on microplastics. That's probably more than anyone in the world has read independently. And we have 50 years of data showing what it is, where it is, how much it is, and that it's non-toxic. They even fed 5% microplastic to rats. 5% of their food for 3 months, nothing happened whatsoever. It's that safe. It's one of the safest things on the planet. And yet the rest of dust is full of things that actually are toxic and give us cancer. So what else is in dust? Huge amounts of quartz, which comes from soil, right? So farmers can actually get cancer by breathing in quartz just from the soil that they're disturbing. That's actually killing people and no one's talking about it. If you look at wood dust, that actually causes cancer when you breathe it too, but nobody cares because it's not plastic. If you look at what else is in dust, we have a lot of dead skin cells, we have bacteria, we have spores and fungi, we have iron, we have cadmium and lead and arsenic and stuff like that, all things that we really should take a look at. No one's talking about any of the actual things present in large amounts that cause a problem. Instead, they're obsessing over a tiny, tiny fraction of a thing that's safe. So it just doesn't make any sense to. Yeah, again, it's a big marketing exercise to give it a special name to make it sound scary.
Yeah. So what I know is like basically all particles that have a certain size that go into your lung cause cancer. So any dust that has a certain physical size and goes into your lungs, that basically is an issue. That's a physical process and not a chemical process. Like the EU once tried to label like titanium dioxide as carcinogenic. And I was like, yeah, any kind of pigment or anything in that size range is an issue if you breathe it in. But if you have it in the plastic, it just makes the plastic look very white, and which is nice. So is there evidence on if you breathe in like microparticles made from plastic or whatever, that it has the same effect, or is there a difference in effect?
Right. So I would say you're halfway right in what you said. Any particle you breathe in is an irritant, but it doesn't cause cancer. So definitely, and this is in my book, people are dying from breathing in pollutants in the air. It's mainly soot is the problem, and car fumes and stuff like that. So those things are in much higher amounts, and they are actually toxic. To cause cancer, you need to have a certain size and a certain shape. So if you look at asbestos, which is a famous one, it's a fiber of a certain size and shape. And if you grind that fiber of asbestos finer, it doesn't cause cancer anymore, because it's not carcinogenic. If you grow that fiber longer and you don't, so it doesn't cause cancer either, even though it's still the exact same asbestos. So it's only a certain size and shape of fiber that goes in your lungs and causes cancer. And plastic doesn't qualify for that. Some of these other things do. Wollastonite can, because it's a fibrous material, and if the size and shape is right, and certain types of quartz can, and so forth. But in general, just regular particles, it's like a nuisance. It's only, as you said, irritating because if there's a lot of it. But plastic, one estimate says plastic is 100,000th of the dust we're ingesting, right? It would take 20,000 years to eat a credit card of plastic. That study from the World Wildlife Fund saying that we eat a credit card of plastic a week, that's been disproven again and again. It's just nonsense. So it would take 20,000 years. The lifetime exposure ingesting plastic is 0.005 grams. According to a peer-reviewed study. That's less than a grain of salt in your whole lifetime in 70 years. So in terms of being a nuisance, it's 100,000th of the dust. And even in other cases where you're looking at dust from the household or places where there's more plastic, there it's still less than 1% of the particles. And as I said, the least toxic part of all the dust. So it just doesn't make any sense on any level to focus on a tiny fraction of the least toxic part of particles.
Okay. So I had a discussion once in a webinar where I basically brought up the point that polyethylene and polypropylene are probably one of the least toxic materials, and in even in microplastic form. So just like to claim that it's gonna be toxic because it's microplastics, and then they cite a bunch of studies that I do not or did not read and did not like see if it was right. Then one of the argument that came was like, yeah, but they accumulate like toxins like PFAS and whatever. And I just wanted to ask you the PFAS question, because there's a really, really big sword hanging above Europe, which is about to, or not potentially, restrict all PFAS, including fluoropolymers. And I just wanted to get your take on that. Do you enjoy the podcast? Then subscribe and rate it on your platform. And join the discussion on LinkedIn. Your feedback and comments help us improve the podcast and bring relevant topics to you. Let's form a better world with plastics.
Yeah. There's a couple of things you said there. One is there are studies showing that microplastics cause harm. But the trouble is other scientists have looked at those studies, and I'm reading really how did they do the science, which is incredibly boring. I don't recommend anyone to do it. But basically, scientists have proven that more than 80% of microplastic studies are not valid because they make horrible mistakes in the science. One mistake they make is they use 1 million times more particles than is actually in the environment. And that makes the study fit directly for the trash can. That is science so bad that if it was up to me, I would put those people in a rocket ship and put them off the planet for being so useless. I would make them pay back their research money. I would take away their professor title and say, sorry, go and learn how to do real science. Because toxicology depends on dose. You can't take 1 million times too much of anything, do an experiment on some daphnid or something, and then say, I found a problem. There's even one study where they say, oh, the fish can't find their food when we expose them to microplastics. I'm like, I'm not surprised if you put 1 million tennis balls flying around in my house, I wouldn't be able to find my kitchen either, right? So these studies are totally incompetent. And another thing that they do wrong is that almost every study uses a type of plastic which no one's exposed to. It doesn't exist in the environment. They use a special kind of plastic you can only find in the lab, which is completely unlike anything that any of us are ever exposed to. So they're making fundamental scientific mistakes so bad that a child wouldn't make them. So if you do see a study that claims to show a harm, it's one of those studies. Another common mistake, there was a recent one saying there's a spoonful of microplastic in the brain, right? And they used a technique called pyrolysis GC mass spectroscopy. And other scientists have literally said you cannot use that technique for detecting microplastic in the body because it sees fat and lipids and it confuses it with plastic. So it finds things that are supposed to be in your brain, like lipids, and says, oh, look, it's plastic, but it isn't plastic. Scientists have literally said, don't use this method. It doesn't work. And this is the method that they used to claim. And of course, the New York Times covered it. It was on the morning shows. All the media covered it without anyone reading that study or checking to see if other scientists have already disproven it. So that's the thing to say about microplastics. Now to come on to the PFAS. PFAS is a giant collection of different chemicals, right? And the idea of banning something because some of them are toxic is really stupid and irresponsible and lazy. And here's why. Let's say there's one robber called Peter, right? That's a good German name. It also works in English, right? There's a robber called Peter, and we decide not to throw Peter in jail. We're going to throw everybody called Peter in jail just to be on the safe side. That is what is happening with PFAS. We have fluorochemicals like Teflon, which we will never escape from planet Earth. And if we ban those materials, we will die on planet Earth. We will never get to space. We won't have some of the medical equipment we need. We won't have some of the electronic equipment we need and computers and stuff, because those are absolutely essential. So to throw away things which are 100% safe and absolutely essential just because a politician was too lazy to actually look at each PFAS and say, all right, this one's toxic, let's get rid of it. This one's non-toxic and important, let's keep it. So that is the whole PFAS argument. It needs to be treated properly, where we look at each substance one by one and make a logical decision, not making a lazy choice by banning everything that has a similar name.
Okay, so I can agree on that. And you wanted the waste question, so I'm going to ask it. So what is your solution to plastic waste?
The first thing to say about plastic waste is, plastic use is 0.5% of all materials, and plastic waste is also 0.5% of all materials. It's about 13 to 15% of household waste, but household waste is only 3% of all waste. I didn't know that when I wrote the first book. So the rest of it's industrial waste, of which hardly any of it's plastic. Most of it's mining waste and stuff like that from digging up rocks and things. So plastic is less than 1% of all waste. And here's the funny thing, and you can check this in your kitchen. Go and weigh a plastic straw. It weighs 0.8 grams. Now weigh a paper straw. It weighs 2 grams. Weigh a steel straw, weighs 22 grams. Weigh 12 grams, I think. Weigh a glass straw, weighs 22 grams, right? If you replace plastic, you generate, on average, 4 times more waste. It's been scientifically proven that plastic is less than 1% of waste, and it massively reduces waste. So this idea that plastic is part of a waste problem is nonsense. What people are really against is not material use, it's not waste, it's litter. They think that plastic is responsible for litter, and science and the courts agree that plastic doesn't cause litter and companies don't cause litter, people cause litter. That is a scientific and legal fact. And people hate to hear it. They're like, he's trying to shift the blame. I'm like, do this experiment. Go to your garden, take something, drop it on the floor, and then blame the plastic and see what a fool you feel. No sensible adult could go into their own garden, drop a candy wrapper, turn around and blame the wrapper for what they just did. That is insanity. If you think that, you should go and check yourself into a psychiatric hospital because you've lost your mind, right? People blaming the litter for their littering is totally wrong according to science because they've studied littering. They know that 81% of litter is dropped on purpose by a person who would never blame themselves. They turn around and blame the litter. They blame the plastics manufacturer. They blame the person who made the soft drink bottle. And it's all just wrong. And here's why it's important to get the blame wrong. Because as soon as you realize that litter is caused by people, the solutions are obvious. The solutions are around changing that person's behavior. And the way to do that, proven, is education. So teaching our kids good stuff at school, deposits, which work, there's scientific studies, because as soon as you think you're dropping money, you stop dropping it, right? If a bottle is worth €1, you don't drop it on the floor anymore because it's the same as dropping €1. And fines for people who do litter. That's how you solve litter. So I'm a problem solver, as I said. As soon as you understand the problem, as soon as you put the blame properly, the solutions are really obvious.
Okay, thank you very much for your insights. So I would like to come to the last question. What advice would you like to give to our listeners in the area of plastic mess?
One thing I would say is that in case you think that I'm one crazy scientist who has an opposite opinion to everyone else, Everything I've said today is backed by peer-reviewed science. You can go to my website. In fact, I would advise you to go to the Plastics Research Council, where me and a bunch of famous professors and scientists all get behind this, and we show the facts, and we quote them word for word. We have links to the studies, so you can go and check it yourself, and everything's there so that you can really see real facts from real scientists instead of nonsense from NGOs and journalists who want your money. So we give this information for free. We work for free. We share the science word for word. And of course, the new book, The Shattering the Plastics Illusion, will be free. It's going to be released on Earth Day next Tuesday. And then you can go there to just Google that. Or go to phantomplastics.com and you can download that. So my overall advice is don't listen to anything a so-called environmental group who wants you to donate tells you, because they will tell you anything, many of these groups. Even the president of Greenpeace left and said that their business model is to tell lies for donations. Their own former president says that, because there's hundreds of millions of dollars involved. Don't listen to people who want your money. Listen to scientists telling you the facts for free. That's my advice.
Okay.
And I want to thank you, Lucas, for giving the chance to make that happen.
Yeah, and thank you very much for coming on. Do you have any last words?
Just to thank you, because the truth doesn't help if no one sees it. And that's the problem we have. This is what I do in my spare time, because I believe in facts over fiction. And I appreciate you joining me in that crusade to educate people so we can make smarter choices.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you very much. This was Dr. Chris DeArmitt, and until the next time. Still looking for more in regards to plastics and medical technology? Visit our website www.gradical.ch and inform yourself on the services of Gradical. You can also check out our market report on medical grade plastics on www.medicalgradeplastics.de. Or you attend a training regarding material compliance at CATS or at SCATZ. And of course, don't forget to rate and subscribe our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Let's form a better world with plastics.